lot of drama at the end of Long Beach. So hopefully that keeps people engaged. Pato hit everyone, it seemed like. I don't know how that happened all of a sudden. I saw the videos and I was like, well, now we've set an interesting precedent because there were no penalties, as far as I'm aware, right? No penalties for essentially just driving Scott Dixon directly into the wall. Interesting precedent that's been set. And I think I'm going to have a question at the drivers' meeting, certainly next at the next event, because that's dangerous when you set that, because now it's like, as long as you put your car there, it doesn't matter what happens to the other guy. If you wreck them, well, great. Then you got one less person to worry about. What did you think about that, Hinch?
I thought it was weird because, and you know, Ross and I had this discussion / debate because we're not entirely aligned on this one.
Yeah.
And I seem to recall at some point there was two things that the officials used to kind of tell drivers, right? One is the needle of responsibility.
Yes.
That was a term that they like to use. And there's more responsibility on the passing car than the car being passed. That's just kind of a universally accepted truth, right? So obviously Pato is the passing car, so there's more responsibility on him going into the situation. The other thing that I remember them saying, apparently, you know, I've spoken to someone who had a conversation with them where they kind of argued this point a little bit, but maybe you can back me up on this. The outcome of contact, in terms of, do both guys just drop a wheel and maybe lose a position? Does one guy lose 2 positions, the other guy keeps going? Does one guy's race end and the other guy carries on to win? You know, like that does play into whether or not a penalty is involved. And in this case, you had one guy's race essentially over. I mean, I know he continued, but he's laps down, so he's essentially over. And one guy carried on with absolutely no issue. So I was expecting a penalty. It was a very late move. It was from pretty far back. There's nothing Scott could have done. But Pato's argument that he was alongside him is like, yeah, you were alongside him at point of contact. But like, if you watch his onboard, how he got there, when he got there, it's like there's, you know, as soon as you hit the brakes and turn in, you're committed to your line, especially on the street circuit. There's nothing you can do. And so Scott would have looked at his mirrors, wasn't even close, hit the brakes. At that point, Pato counted 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, then hit the brakes. There's nothing Scott can do, and Scott's race is over, and Pato keeps going. So look, it's a racing deal in the sense, like, I don't blame Pato for trying to make the move. I was just surprised that there was not any repercussions from IndyCar. So I'm curious to see how they answer that question at the next drivers' meeting.
Well, exactly, but also, like, Pato literally like threw himself into like another 3 cars, like either before or after that. Like I didn't see that incident on track because my team was like, oh, there's a bunch of cars in the wall in turn 8, and like they continued, and I got there and like everyone was like rummaging around and continued. But like when I saw that clip, like again, Pato legitimately like had no hope of making that corner, and that could have been like a track blockage. You know what I mean? So we last on our last show, Pato Mania, happy that he's getting a lot of support. But like I think that was, if you look at last year, you see Joseph fencing Grosjean at Nashville, right? You look at that and like there was no penalty for that, right? No penalty there, if I remember correctly. There was Scott McLaughlin,
Rossi and Felix.
Yeah,
Rossi and Felix at Toronto.
Exactly.
No penalty there.
But even at St. Pete, you had McLaughlin and Grosjean, right? Like now both of them ended up on the wall, but McLaughlin got a penalty for that. Am I right?
So I believe so. I don't remember actually, but I think maybe.
Yeah, or no, or well, Kirk would also got a penalty.
They were out. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe he did, but like it's just there's a couple incidents where I look and like now this is smaller, but like Devlin shoving me off the track at the Indy GP, like it's the same thing. If there was a wall there, I end up in the wall, right? It's the same thing, and there's no penalties being issued. So I guess I don't know if we should be cool with that as a sport. Like I get it, but like as long as you're aware that it's going to look bad when like everyone starts just wrecking everyone because you can. Like now the precedent is like put your car next to the other car. Don't care about said other car. He is now on the wall. Like that. I don't think that sets a good, because again, we want to have the best racing, I think, and I think we do have really good racing, but like race control hasn't done anything. I got a penalty last year for making a half block move to Grosjean, had to let him by. And I was like, well, what? Like, we're going to allow people to crash each other with no penalty? But then, like, if I make the wrong move because I looked at my mirror late and tried to block him, well, that penalty. I find it a little bit odd, I would say.
So what I'll say to that is, there's always two sides to the story, right? And
Yeah.
so looking at it from the other side, I will say that you want to race control. They never want to get involved, right? They want to be as removed and step back as possible. And so you don't want to discourage drivers from making moves. So I think that definitely plays into their decisions. And then the other side of it is, I see what you're saying, and kind of Scott made a similar comment in his post-race interview, kind of gloves off. If that's how we're going to race, let's race, sort of thing. I think it's important for people to remember that it's really hard to do that in an Indy car and also get away with it yourself. Like, we don't have bumpers, and we don't have, like, our wheels are exposed. So, like,
well, he didn't get away with it
the
first time. Like, he didn't get away with it when he spun himself into the wall. So, like,
no, that was the second one. Yeah,
exactly.
Yes, and that one he did stand up and say 100% my fault. I got it too deep, and that really is, that's the one he could have taken out 3 guys. Nobody actually got taken out by that, which was very lucky. But I think that even though the drivers are seeing this, this precedent, if you want to put it that way, being set, I don't really think it's going to lead to too big of an increase in that type of incident, because it's hard to do that right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, if you gave Pato 10 more laps and Scott Dixon 10 more laps, probably be like, all right, recreate that exactly where he goes off and you have no damage and carry on. It's really hard to do.
Yeah.
So I'm not too worried about it getting too rough and tumble out there. And I know race control doesn't want to get too involved. And look, fans are passionate. If Pato gets a penalty, there's going to be a raft of fans that are like,
oh, yeah,
that's BS. This was a racing incident, whatever. If he doesn't get a penalty, there's going to be a raft of fans be like, how can you let people drive like that? This is crazy.
Hinch, when you're in the booth now, and we saw it at Texas a little bit, because you and Townsend and even Lee with the Rossi, Kyle Kirkwood incident in the pits, you guys came out on the broadcast, and from your vantage point, you're like, yeah, that looks like it's on Kyle. And then it comes back afterwards, and we have all that mess, and Kyle's quote tweeting IndyCar and NBC. Now, incidents on the track when you're in the booth. Is it a weird balance for you? Are you thinking about, I need to kind of sit on a line here a little bit, or are you just not afraid to keep throwing out the opinion?
Yeah, I mean, look, my job is to call it how I see it. And, I was in the car for 11 years. I know what it's like to be in most of these situations, and I just have to give my opinion how I see it. The fact of the matter is, people will disagree. If I was involved in the incident in the car myself, people are going to disagree with your opinion on it, right? You're not going to get everybody on the same page. So I have to be very conscious of the fact that my job is to call it how I see it. I can't protect anybody. I can't protect my friends, whenever. All the guys are my friends. Like, I get along with everybody. If someone has an issue with something that I said after the race, I'm more than happy to talk to them about it. And I did talk to Kyle after Texas, actually. And I mean, that was a unique one, because I've gone over the videos on that, all the different angles 100 times. And it's just like, there is such a good case for both sides of that being at fault that I would say it was a racing incident. It was a really hard one to put a penalty on when I really kind of dissected it. Still thought it was maybe a little, I think there was more that the combined 27 group could do to avoid that the 7 group, given all the information. But yeah, no, you have to just call it, man. It's tough sometimes. You're gonna, piss some people off maybe, but you got to do what you got to do.
You think it's more difficult for you though, being like, it's like, the kid who graduates high school and then like 4 years later he's back teaching at high school, right? It's like, what the hell, you were just here, right? You know what I mean? People, is it a little bit more awkward and weird for you? It has to be.
Yeah, for sure. But I have to forget that part of it. I have to just, when we're on air, I've got to just do my job and be professional about. Yeah. And then, like I said, I'm sure there will be times where I'll say something on air because it's how I see it, but then I'll immediately go find that guy and be like, hey man, I didn't mean to like swing at you, but like, that's just how it looks. I mean, tell me I'm wrong and we can talk about it, but like, you just gotta do it. That was one of the things they told me. They're like, when I first got the job at NBC, when they first offered me the job, they're like, just so we're clear, you're going to be okay calling out your friends, right? Like, we can't have everybody just
Sure.
treated with gloves, with white gloves on and whatever. I'm like, no, I'll do what I got to do.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree because I dabbled in a little SRX commentary, you know what I mean, and like,
Yeah,
got the boys in there that we know about, but you gotta call it like you see it for sure. I think we did a little research on that issue that we talked about. Scott McLaughlin did get a drive-through in St. Pete, so like to just cap that off. Interesting that ends up with a penalty and the paddle thing doesn't. So I think it'll be very curious to. We could get into it for hours, but like it'll be very curious basically just to see how that progresses because Pato coming out saying, I ain't going to apologize with his huge posse of fans behind him. Love that scene. Honestly, as a fan, I thought that was fantastic. Probably not the greatest thing to say because like you did literally wreck 6-time champion Scott Dixon like straight into the wall. But great for the sport, I think. Great for the sport. As long as we just don't get into demo derbies, great for the sport, right? I think so.
I think what I could see being a topic or a rebuttal from the stewards when that question is asked is the situation with Scott. He blatantly lost control of the car, right? Like he had a rear lock up, it stepped out, and you could say that loss of control is part of the reason why the penalty was applied. In Pato's case, I mean, he didn't lose control. He didn't lock a front tire. He didn't lock any rears. He just fired it in there. So maybe that's where they draw the line. But then it goes back to Toronto with Felix and Alex, where Felix got a big oversteer on exit, and that's what snapped his car into Rossi's car, and that's what put Rossi into the wall. No penalty there. You could argue loss of control. So it's like, I think when I talk about this with Rossi, his big thing is just like, I want consistency. He's like, they didn't call a penalty on a Felix situation, and I ended up in the wall, and Felix ended up on the podium, I think. So he goes, I'm glad they didn't give a penalty, or else I'd be even more angry about Felix not getting a penalty in Toronto. He's like, I don't care what the outcome is as long as it's consistent.
Yeah, and that's exactly the point. That like we just want to make sure like this can't be a confusing message because let's say you get 3 races left in the season and there's, a championship on the line and you might not have called something for the Pato incident here, but then you decide that, okay, he went off and fired off one of his championship competitors or someone else fired him off and like he's expecting a penalty. It's like, dude, you didn't get penalized for doing the same thing in Long Beach. So like they have to be consistent. It's one of those things that's where it just becomes like right now, hey, you know what? Racing, boom, bing, bong, everyone's in the wall. It's that sometimes like that's fine, but the consistency for sure is the key.
So Joey, well, let me ask you this.
Yes.
So as someone who's had fewer IndyCar starts than Conor or myself, you're watching that from the out, but you've watched a bunch of IndyCar. You're watching that from the outside. Do you like that race control didn't get involved in that? Did you think like that was the kind of move that you're like, that seems a little too much, maybe should have been penalized? Like, what was your take on it?
No, after doing this for almost over a year and a half now, and talking with folks like you guys, I was of the same opinion as Conor. Just because I'm kind of looking at it and exactly what he said. I'm just like, if that's not, then what is? And so that's where, I'm sitting there at Daredevil Brewing and Speedway with a couple buddies, Sam Hay, who Hinch, and he's kind of losing it. And he's just like, how is there nothing going on there? What is Pato doing? And so from my vantage point, it's the same thing. And I know that there's been instances, like Conor said with Devlin last year, where we had a full podcast episode essentially about that, where we were not only breaking down the incident, but also what Conor said, over the radio, which was great. I guess that's just kind of my thing. And I look at it, I always try to do like parallels and analogies here, like, like Colin Cowherd, if you will. But like for the non, for someone who's just a very casual fan of racing, I look at it as like, okay, if you have that defense that's really, really aggressive, right? And they're all over the receivers in the first quarter and they're not calling it, they're kind of setting the precedent, right? That they're going to let them play, And then like you see in the Super Bowl this past year, all of a sudden at the most crucial time, they call kind of you're going to call that holding penalty? So to Conor's point, what he's saying, if, 3 races left, or, you're out in Portland or whatever, and there's a championship on the line, you look back to Long Beach in April and be like, where's the line here? This is a very gray area, and I can't figure it out. So that's how I saw it.